Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. I'm Wendy, and today we're exploring a topic that affects more people than you might imagine: high functioning anxiety. This is something often goes unnoticed by others, yet can feel absolutely exhausting for the person experiencing it. We'll be looking at what high functioning anxiety actually is, how it shows up in everyday life, and most importantly, how counselling and therapeutic support can help you to move from constantly striving to genuinely thriving. For those joining us for the very first time, I would like to introduce my co-presenter, Ian. Ian is a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and the founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. Hope is a counselling organisation offering support throughout England for a very wide range of concerns and challenges. A warm welcome to you, Ian.
Thank you, Wendy. And let me return the favour by introducing yourself. You, Wendy, are a highly experienced CBT psychotherapist that's been involved in the field of mental health and well-being for well over 30 years now. And we're both passionate about helping people navigate their mental health and their well-being journeys. And today's discussion about high functioning anxiety is a particularly important subject because it's something that often hides in plain sight.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued, Ian. I'm very intrigued. Ian, let's just start with the basics. When we talk about high functioning anxiety, what exactly do we mean?
Great place to start. High functioning anxiety isn't actually an official clinical diagnosis. You won't find it in a diagnostic manual like the DSM-5. However, it's a term that has become widely recognized because it captures something very real that many people experience. Essentially, high functioning anxiety describes people who live with significant anxiety but continue to function well in their day-to-day lives. So, from the outside, those people often appear extremely capable. They may well be very successful, they may be very put together, they might be excellent at work, they might be excellent in terms of maintaining social commitment, keeping up with family responsibilities, and generally appearing to have everything really quite well under control. But internally, it's a completely different story. Inside, they're often battling constant worry, self doubt, racing thought, a persistent fear of failure or letting others down. There's this absolutely exhausting gap between how they appear to others and how they actually feel themselves.
Okay, so what you're describing there, it sounds like a real disconnect between their external presentation and their internal experience. Is that right? So perhaps you can give us some examples of what this might look like in everyday life. Is that okay?
Absolutely. So let me paint a picture that might feel familiar to some listeners. So imagine, and let's call this person Sarah, but it could be absolutely anybody that you know in your day-to-day life. Sarah is a successful professional who consistently delivers excellent work, always meets her deadlines, is known for being very reliable, very detail orientated. Her colleagues think she's incredibly organized and very calm under pressure. But what they don't see is that Sarah spends hours lying awake at night, replaying conversations from the day, worrying about whether she said the right thing or she made a good impression. She triple checks every email before sending it. arrives at least 30 hours early to every meeting because she's absolutely terrified of being late, feels physically sick before presentations, despite having given hundreds of them successfully previously. She says yes to almost every request because she's worried about disappointing people or being seen as incompetent. Her calendar is packed, not because she loves being busy, but because stopping means sitting with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. She appears confident, but inside she's constantly questioning herself and running worst case scenarios through her mind. That's what we mean by high functioning anxiety. You're keeping up all the plates, they're spinning, but you're constantly exhausted from the constant effort and the vigilance it takes to maintain that appearance.
Wow, Ian, that is such a vivid description. And I imagine it will resonate with so many listeners. I'm wondering, how does high functioning anxiety differ from what we might call, say, regular anxiety or even anxiety disorders that people might be more familiar with? Can you tell me a bit more about that?
A really excellent question. And thank you for asking it, Wendy. And the key difference is really about visible impairment versus hidden struggle. So if we think about more commonly recognized forms of anxiety, such as generalized anxiety disorder or social anxiety or panic disorders, the symptoms often interfere noticeably with daily functioning. Someone might avoid a social situation entirely. They struggle to leave the house, they miss work regularly, or have different difficulties in terms of maintaining relationships. The anxiety is more visible to others because it creates very clear limitations on the person. Whereas with high functioning anxiety, the person has developed sophisticated coping mechanisms and compensatory strategies that allow them to continue functioning at a very high level despite the anxiety. In fact, their anxiety often drives their success, and the fear of failure is often the thing that pushes them to work even harder. It's the thing that drives them to prepare more thoroughly and to never let their standards slip. However, and this is the really crucial element, just because someone is functioning doesn't mean they're not suffering. The anxiety is still very much there. It's just about channeling into achievement and productivity rather than avoidance. And that comes at a significant cost to their well-being, their relationships, and their day-to-day quality of life. It's also really worth noting that high functioning anxiety can sometimes mask or coexist with other diagnosable conditions like generalized anxiety disorder. So the functioning part doesn't mean the anxiety is any less or less worthy of support.
Okay. Okay. So thank you for that. So if high functioning anxiety is often, say, invisible to others, I'm wondering how people can recognize it in themselves. And what are the key signs to look for, Ian?
And that's a really important question because recognition is the first step towards getting support. Let me just take a moment to break it down a little bit into different areas where high functioning anxiety typically may show up for people. So when we look at behavioral patterns, people with high functioning anxiety often feel compelled to stay constantly busy. They're filling every moment with tasks, they're filling every moment with activities. They tend to over prepare for absolutely everything, spending far more time than is necessary on preparation to avoid any possibility of failure. And there's often a real struggle to delegate or ask for help from people because they They worry that others won't do things to their own personal standards. They say yes to every request, even when their plate is already absolutely full. And that's driven by fear. It's driven by the fear of disappointing others or being seen as incompetent by people. And you'll often find them arriving extremely early to appointments or events because the thought of being late just creates this utterly unbearable anxiety for them. And there's this pattern of checking and rechecking and then rechecking again, constantly checking their work repeatedly, whether it's emails, whether it's presentations, whether it's day-to-day tasks. And then there's what we might think of as being the more internal experiences, the mental, the emotional signs that others may not necessarily see in you. There's a persistent racing of thoughts that's just difficult to switch off, particularly at night. There's constant mental rehearsal of upcoming events or of conversations that may be coming up. Constant rumination over past interactions, replaying them and analyzing what might possibly have gone. People often find it difficult to be present in the moment because their mind is always jumping ahead to the next thing. There's a persistent sense of restlessness or feeling on edge, even when there's no obvious threat. And small mistakes or minor imperfections can trigger what really is a disproportionate level of worry. And many people experience also what we refer to as imposter syndrome. We've talked about that previously. And that's just this feeling like we're a fraud, despite evidence of competence and evidence of success. And high functioning anxiety also shows up physically in ways people might not immediately connect to anxiety. So that might come in the form of tension headaches or migraines. Those are things that are really quite common, particularly during busy periods. Often it might be things like jaw clenching or teeth grinding. These things can often happen during sleep. Digestive issues can be really common. Things like IBS, nausea, stomach discomfort can often be found with people with high functioning anxiety. And despite exhaustion, people struggle with falling or staying asleep and experience fatigue that doesn't improve with rest because the mind never completely switches off. We might also notice things like muscle tension, particularly in the neck, in the shoulders, the back. And finally, it can affect relationships in really very distinct ways. There's difficulty relaxing or switching off during social time or in holidays. People find themselves apologizing excessively, even when nothing's wrong. They seek constant reassurance from other people and have real difficulty with the expression of vulnerability or asking for support. Partners and friends might notice they just seem distant or distracted the entire time because mental energy is consumed by day-to-day worry. And there are often perfectionistic expectations that they place on themselves that can sometimes extend to other people as well. So those are just some of the things that we may notice, Wendy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It's really interesting and very comprehensive.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering, with all those symptoms, I'm just wondering why don't people recognize this as anxiety? Why often does it go unnoticed?
That's the really insidious nature of high functioning anxiety. There's several reasons why it can just fly under the radar. And the first is our society often rewards the very behaviors that are driven by anxiety. Being a perfectionist, working long hours, never saying no to people, always being prepared. These are frequently seen as really positive traits. They're often seen as positive rather than potential warning signs of something else. So people receive that external validation for patterns that are actually causing them really, really severe internal distress. The second thing is because they're still functioning, they're still holding down a job, they're still maintaining a relationship, they're still fulfilling their day to day responsibilities. Neither they nor others around them necessarily recognize that something's actually wrong. And that's this pervasive belief that if you're coping, you don't have a real problem. But coping isn't the same as thriving. And thirdly, many people with high functioning anxiety have lived this way for so long that it just feels normal to them. They might think, this is just who I am. This is just what it takes to be successful. They don't realize that constant internal turmoil isn't a necessary price for achievement. And finally, there, for many, can often just be a sense of shame or minimization involved. People think, I should just be grateful. I have a good job. I have a supportive relationship. I'm managing. What do I have to complain when I have those things? And they dismiss their own suffering because from the outside, their life looks good.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, very good point, Ian. Very good point. So I just want to go back a point because you've touched on this already, but I just think it's really important we explore this impact of high functioning anxiety, perhaps in more depth. So, what are the real costs of living this way? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think this is absolutely crucial, Wendy, because understanding the costs often motivate people to seek help rather than just continuing to push on through. Living with chronic, unaddressed anxiety does, over time, take a really significant toll on mental health for many people. So, over time, that constant stress, that constant worry can lead to burnout, that state of emotional, that physical, that mental exhaustion, where you simply have nothing left to give. And depression often develops when anxiety is sustained over very long periods as well. There's an increased risk, and we know this from the research. There's an increased risk of other anxiety disorders or the intensification of existing anxiety as well. And people experience a diminished sense of self worth that becomes tied exclusively to productivity and achievement. And there's often a lot of joy in activities that used to bring pleasure because everything feels like another task to be managed. And this mind body connection means that chronic anxiety doesn't just stay in our heads. The physical health consequences are incredibly real for many people. Our immune system can become weakened, making you more susceptible to illness. There's cardiovascular strain from sustained levels of stress response, and chronic pain conditions can develop for some people as well. Sleep disorders create a really vicious cycle of exhaustion and anxiety, and digestive disorders can become common for some as well. And over time, there's just an increased risk of a whole a whole variety of different stress related conditions. And high functioning anxiety significantly impacts our connection with other people as well. So partners may feel shut out, or they come second to work. Friendships can suffer because you're always just too busy or too preoccupied to truly engage with those external relationships. Children of parents with high functioning anxiety may start to internalize similar patterns or feel that they need to be perfect. And colleagues as well might experience you as controlling or difficult to work with if perfectionistic standards extend to other people. And the inability to be vulnerable within our relationships often present as being as having a lack of depth, a lack of genuine intimacy as well. Perhaps most importantly, high functioning anxiety robs you of presence and joy in your quality of life. You're so focused on the next thing that you can't enjoy the present moment. Achievements can feel hollow because you're already worrying about the next challenge, the next thing that you have to do, the next tick on your to-do list. There's no sense of enough success, enough preparation, enough validation. And life becomes about managing anxiety rather than experiencing joy and fulfillment. You miss out on spontaneity, you miss out on relaxation, and you miss out on genuine rest as well.
It sounds exhausting. Just hearing you describe it, Ian, it really does. And I imagine that for many people, they probably don't even realize how much of a toll it's taking until they probably reach breaking thought. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's absolutely right, Wendy. Many people who come to us at Hope Therapy and Counselling, for example, only recognise the full extent of the impact when they begin to slow down and reflect. They've been in what we might describe as that survival mode for so long that they don't even realise how much energy they've been expending. They just get through the day. And the concerning thing is that high functioning anxiety is often sustainable until it isn't. People can maintain that pattern for weeks and months and years and sometimes decades, but eventually something gives. It might be a health crisis, a relationship breakdown, a complete breakdown, a burnout at work, or simply reaching a point where they realize that they can't continue to live that way. But the positive news with all of that is that you don't have to wait until you reach that breaking point. There is support available, and it's far easier to address those patterns before they lead to more serious consequences. So I think there is hope for people that are struggling in that way.
Okay, that's really good to hear. That's a very positive message to say, isn't it? So, my next question, Ian, this leads me to wonder, where does the high functioning anxiety come from? Why do some people develop these patterns? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and that's a really important question because understanding the origin can often help people just feel less self critical and maybe more compassionate towards themselves as well. High functioning anxiety, it doesn't develop in a vacuum. There are usually factors, often multiple factors, that can contribute to that. So, for many people, the roots go back to childhood and their sort of early formative life experiences. They may well have grown up in environments where love, attention, or approval felt conditional on achievement or on good behavior. Maybe they had parents who were themselves very anxious or perfectionistic or had very high expectations. They might have experienced pressure to excel. Maybe that's academically or in other areas. But from a very young age, many learnt that being good, compliant, and high achieving were the ways to feel safe or valued. And family environments where mistakes were criticized rather than seen as learning opportunities can be really quite formative as well. Sometimes there were situations maybe where a child felt they needed to be responsible or perfect to maintain a sense of family stability. And these early experiences can just create what can be really quite deep seated beliefs like I'm only valuable if I'm productive, or mistakes are dangerous, or I need to be perfect in order to be loved. Certain innate personality characteristics can also make someone just more vulnerable to developing high functioning anxiety. Naturally conscientious individuals who just care very deeply about doing things well, people who are maybe sensitive to others' emotions and others' needs, those with a really strong sense of desire to help and to please others, and people who are naturally very detail orientated, very thorough, recognizing that these aren't flaws, they're often wonderful qualities. But when combined with anxiety, they can fuel a sense of perfectionism. They can fuel what we might describe as people pleasing patterns. And sometimes high functioning anxiety just develops or manifests due to life circumstances and life experiences. So, people experiencing failure or criticism that felt particularly painful or shaming can be really quite pivotal. Traumatic experiences that created a sense that the world is unsafe and you need to stay vigilant can really shape these patterns of thought in feeling and behavior. Having a significant responsibility at a very young age, such as caring for siblings or unwell parents, can really instill these ways of being, and competitive environments where achievement was necessary for recognition or advancement often have the effect of reinforcing these behaviors as well. And also, past experiences when letting your guard down led to negative consequences teach people to stay perpetually vigilant. And we also can't completely ignore the broader society and cultural influences that impact as well. So there are cultural messages that equate busyness with importance and rest with laziness. Social media creates this constant comparison culture and this pressure to be present and presenting the perfect image the whole time. And workplace cultures reward overwork and availability very often. Economic pressures create genuine anxiety about job security, financial stability, and gender expectations. For example, women often face pressure to be both professional, sustaining that professional image, but also to balance that against more traditional caring roles as well. And that can just add additional layers of complexity for some people. And I guess that finally there's just biological component that we need to acknowledge for some people. Some people have a naturally more reactive stress response system as well. So differences in brain chemistry can make some people more prone to anxiety. These neurobiological factors interact with the environment and experience to shape how anxiety manifests for them. So there's lots of really quite complex factors that can play a part is probably the long answer to your question, Wendy.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. So to summarize then, I think what you're saying, it really is a whole combination of factors. And it therefore makes sense why someone might develop these patterns without consciously choosing to do these things. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important thing to understand. High function anxiety isn't a character flaw or a personal weakness, it's an understandable response to a combination of different factors. And many people developing those patterns as a way of coping with genuine challenge or threats can do so whether real or perceived. And the strategies that now cause distress often served once as a protection function at some point as well. That's a really important thing for us to remember. So being highly vigilant or over preparing or people pleasing, these maybe at some point kept you safe or helped you succeed in certain environments. And the problem is that those strategies over time can become habitual and persistent, even when they're no longer necessary or no longer helpful or even damaging to you. And that's really where therapy can just help people to understand things. It starts to help us to understand the origins without attributing blame. And then once we do that, we can just start to gently work to update some of those old patterns of thought and behavior, some of the old beliefs that no longer serve our lives any further.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ian. So, just to summarize, we've talked about what high functioning anxiety looks like and also the impact it can have on individuals. So, I'm just wondering for someone listening who recognizes themselves in this description, how do they know when it's time to reach out for professional support? Could you tell us a bit more about that, Ian?
A really important question, Wendy, because people with high functioning anxiety often minimize their struggles and they delay reaching out and seeking help. They think, I'm managing fine, others people have it far worse. I should be able to handle this on my own. But here's what I'd say: if you're listening to this and thinking, that sounds like me, that awareness itself is really significant. So let me outline maybe some clear indicators that professional support might be beneficial for you. So if you're achieving goals, if you're meeting responsibilities, but it feels increasingly difficult, like you're running on empty or you're pushing a boulder uphill every single day, maybe that's a sign. Success shouldn't feel this hard or this joyless. If you're experiencing regular headaches, digestive issues, sleep problems, muscle tension, and don't have another medical explanation, anxiety might be manifesting physically within your body. And your body is often first to signal that something needs attention. If a loved one has mentioned that you seem stressed, unavailable, distant, or if you notice that you're withdrawing from social connections because you're too overwhelmed, too busy, too tired, then that's significant. Relationships are fundamental to our ongoing being. If your mind is constantly racing, if you're struggling to relax during what should be downtime, should be holidays, should be breaks, if you're feeling more stressful, then it's worth addressing. Everyone deserves to experience genuine rest. If you're constantly sacrificing sleep, if you're constantly sacrificing proper meals or exercise or activities you used to enjoy because you're just too busy or you're too anxious, your well-being is being compromised. If you notice you're increasingly relying on alcohol, overworking, excessive exercise, or other behaviors in order to manage your anxiety, these are signs that you need healthier coping mechanisms. Because perhaps most importantly, if you're achieving things but feeling no satisfaction, if you can't remember the last time you genuinely felt relaxed, you felt genuinely happy, or if you're questioning whether this is all life has to offer, these are really powerful indicators that something just needs to start to change.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that, Ian. And I'm just wondering whether people might worry that seeking help for high functioning anxiety isn't justified because they are coping. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I would very simply say coping isn't the same as thriving, and that people deserve more than just getting through the day. Just because you're managing to keep everything together doesn't mean you should have to continue living with that constant internal turmoil. Maybe think about it this way. If you had a persistent physical pain that didn't stop you working but made everything harder, made it less enjoyable, you'd seek treatment, wouldn't you? You wouldn't wait until you literally couldn't function. And mental and emotional well-being deserves exactly the same consideration. Also, important to recognize that early intervention is far more effective than waiting until you are absolutely at that crisis point. Patterns of high functioning anxiety become more entrenched the longer they go on for, and the costs accumulate over time. So, addressing them soon, it simply means preventing more serious consequences if left somewhere down the line. And I think here's something really important. Reaching out for support isn't a sign that you're failing or that you're weak. It's actually a sign of self awareness. It's actually a sign of courage. It takes strength to acknowledge that something isn't working and to prioritize your own personal well being. And I hope therapy and counseling, others, yourself, we constantly see that people wish they'd reached out sooner. They're often surprised by how much lighter life can feel when they just start to address those patterns rather than just pushing through them. So again, the overarching message is there is hope, there is an answer, and that the sooner we reach out for that, the easier it is to get things back on track again.
Yeah, very valid points. Yeah, I totally get that in what you're saying. It's a really good point to make. Let's start focusing on solutions. So, how can counseling and therapy specifically help someone with high functioning anxiety? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and this is where the conversation maybe becomes really helpful, because there are effective, very evidence-based approaches that can genuinely make a difference. So the first thing to understand is that therapy for high functioning anxiety isn't about stopping you from being successful. It isn't about stopping you from being ambitious. It's not about lowering your standards or becoming complacent. Instead, it's about helping you to achieve and live your life without the constant exhaustion and undercurrent of anxiety that you may be experiencing at the moment. Let me just walk through the key areas where therapy can be really helpful. Often, the first crucial step is simply developing awareness of the pattern. And many people with high functioning anxiety have been operating that way for so long that they don't even recognize it's anxiety. They think it's just who they are as people. And therapy just provides space to identify specific anxiety patterns and triggers and understands how anxiety shows up uniquely for you, to recognize the connection between thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations, and in turn, our behaviors, and to understand the origins of those patterns without self blame or blame of others necessary. And this awareness itself is really powerful because you can change patterns that you don't recognize exist in the first place. So, high functioning anxiety is often maintained by really rigid, perfectionistic thinking patterns. And therapy, particularly approaches like CBT, which you'll be very familiar with, Wendy, just helps you identify what we refer to as cognitive distortions or unhelpful thinking styles. Thoughts like, if I'm not perfect, I've failed. Or if I say no, people would think I'm incompetent. And you learn to examine the evidence for and against those thoughts rather than simply accepting them as facts. You develop more balanced, more realistic ways of thinking, and you reduce your catastrophic thinking and worst case scenario planning and constant challenge and constantly challenge beliefs about self-worth being tied up in things such as productivity. And many people with high functioning anxiety have become disconnected from their emotions, or they try to override them with action and busyness. And therapy just helps you to recognize and to name those emotions as they arise, to understand that emotions are information rather than threats, to start to develop some tolerance for uncomfortable feelings rather than immediately trying to fix or escape them. Use grounding, use mindfulness techniques to stay present rather than getting caught up in anxiety spirals that and learn that you can feel anxious and still be okay. You don't always need to act on the anxiety. And therapy helps you gradually shift behaviors that maintain anxiety. So, this includes learning to set boundaries, to say no without feeling excessive levels of guilt, practicing delegation and asking for help, experimenting with good enough rather than perfect, and building in genuine rest and recovery periods, reducing compulsive checking and over preparation, and developing self care practices that aren't just another task on a to do list. And sometimes high functioning anxiety is connected to deeper issues that need attention. And this might include past experiences or trauma that created a sense of needing to stay vigilant. Core beliefs about self worth developed in those very formative childhood years, attachment patterns that make it difficult to trust others or show vulnerability, or unprocessed grief or loss that's been pushed aside in favor of keeping busy. And there are different therapeutic approaches, such as EMDR or other counselling approaches that can help process some of those deeper issues. Therapy also helps you just step back and ask important questions. What actually matters to me beyond achievement and productivity? What kind of life do I want to be living? What are my values, and am I living in alignment with them? Who would I be if I wasn't driven by anxiety? And this can help people move from anxiety driven functioning to value driven living.
Okay, thank you. That's really comprehensive, Ian. Thank you very much for that. It's very good and very positive. And my next question is, are there particular therapeutic approaches that are especially effective for high functioning anxiety?
Yeah, there are several approaches which have really strong evidence for addressing the different components of high functioning anxiety. What one which many people may have heard of is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's a highly effective approach for anxiety because it directly addresses the thought patterns and the behaviors that maintain it. So, for high functioning anxiety specifically, CBT helps to identify and to challenge some of the perfectionistic thinking, to recognize and modify people pleasing behaviors and just start to experiment with behavioral change, but doing it within a structured, gradual way. And also to develop specific coping strategies for anxiety provoking situations that we may find ourselves in as well. And CBT is a really lovely approach for many people because it's very practical, it's very skill based, and typically focuses on present patterns rather than having to spend lots and lots of time going back and exploring the deepest past that we may have. And then there are approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. It can be a really valuable approach for people with high functioning anxiety because it focuses on accepting that some level of discomfort is actually part of life rather than something to be eliminated. So it's about clarifying personal values separate from anxiety driven goals, and then learning to notice the thoughts and the feelings without being controlled by them. Taking action based approaches can be especially helpful for people who've tried to fix their anxiety through achievement and control. And then we've got things like mindfulness based approaches as well. That constant mental busyness of high functioning anxiety. And mindfulness can just start to train attention to stay in the present moment rather than racing ahead or ruminating on the past. So it can start to develop a more non-judgmental relationship with thoughts and feelings and just create some level of space between stimulus and response, and just help you start noticing the physical sensations that we might associate with anxiety without the need to constantly respond and react to them. And for people whose minds never stop, mindfulness can be a really transformative approach. And then there are what we might describe as more compassion focused therapeutic approaches, which help develop a level of self compassion, a level of kindness towards yourself. You learn to understand the evolutionary purpose of anxiety. So seeing it more as an evolutionary process rather than being about self blame. And this can be particularly powerful for addressing that really harsh inner critic that many people with high functioning anxiety can carry. And for those whose anxiety is rooted in experiences or deep seated beliefs, there are things like schema therapies or psychodynamic approaches, which can just help us look at those early relationship experiences and how they impact our current thinking and practices. And organizations like Hope and yourself and other organizations out there just learn to blend different approaches. So depending on why somebody is struggling in this way, they will just blend or integrate different approaches that may be helpful to support people. I think the most important factor isn't necessarily which specific approach is used. It's just working with a therapist who understands what high functioning anxiety is and how it presents, and somebody that's going to create a safe and non judgmental space, working in a collaborative way and really understanding the uniqueness of your personal situation.
Mm. Okay, thank you for that, Ian. That's very comprehensive again, very comprehensive. And I really appreciate that professional support is extremely valuable and very important, especially the way you described it, to actually get into those sort of deeper beliefs about themselves and to understand that. But I'm just wondering whether if somebody can't access therapy or can't afford it or there's nothing on the NHS, Are there things that people can start doing for themselves if they recognize high functioning anxiety in their lives? Can you give some suggestions there, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Wendy. And whilst therapy provides structure support, it supports deeper work, there are definitely practical strategies people can implement on their own, and for some people can be incredibly helpful. They don't they don't replace therapy if the anxiety is significantly impacting your life, but they can be a helping starting point for some people, or even sometimes complements professional support that you might be getting. So, one of the first things you can do is just build awareness. And so you might be looking at things like journaling, start noticing, start recording some of the patterns. So just keep an anxiety journal, noting when anxiety spikes, what triggers it, how it manifests. Track your thoughts, particularly notice repetitive words or self critical statements, and note physical symptoms and when they occur. Identify patterns around people pleasing, overcommitment, perfectionism. So, this just creates data that can help you to understand your own specific patterns rather than feeling like you're drowning in a general sense of overwhelm. The next thing might be about looking at things like boundaries and practicing saying no to people, starting small. So, say no to something relatively low stakes. Notice that the word doesn't end, that the world doesn't end. So, use phrases like, I need to check my capacity before committing, just to buy a little bit of time. Remember that saying no to one thing is saying yes to something else, saying yes to your time, your energy, your well being. So, recognizing that people who truly respect you will appreciate honest boundaries. And then just challenging some of the perfectionism in small ways by experimenting with good enough. Deliberately send an email without checking it 5 times. Submit work that good rather than perfect, and leave the house without checking the door is locked multiple times before you go. Allow dishes to sit overnight or to leave something slightly messy. Notice that the catastrophes we fear didn't actually happen. And building in genuine rest, and that can be a really essential thing to do. And this isn't the same as collapsed exhaustion at the end of the day. Schedule downtime the same way you schedule work tasks. Try activities that genuinely relax you rather than just feel productive. Reading for pleasure, a gentle walk in the countryside, a bath, time with a loved one. Practicing doing nothing without feeling guilty about it. Recognizing rest as necessary, not as an optional extra. Mindfulness, grounding practices can help manage the racing thoughts and the physical symptoms. Try simple breathing exercises. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. Use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique when anxiety starts to spike. Notice 5 things that you can see, 4 you can hear, 3 you can touch, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste, and just practice brief mindfulness moments throughout the day. Noticing sensations like washing your hands, really tasting your tea, feeling your feet on the floor. And there are apps out there like Headspace or Calm that can really provide guided practices in that regard. There's lots of things on YouTube as well. And just noticing extreme thinking patterns and practice nuance in challenging all or nothing thinking. Instead of I've completely failed, maybe this didn't go entirely as planned, but I can still learn from this. Replace I should be able to do everything with I can prioritize what matters most. Moving away from people will hate me if I'm not perfect to most people are too focused on their own lives to judge me as harshly as I judge myself. And if you're someone who makes overwhelming lists, just creating more realistic to-do lists. Maybe identifying 3 points for the day rather than 15 tasks, knowing from experience that we're not going to get every one of them done. High functioning anxiety also can be incredibly isolating. So just connecting with others is a really important thing. So share what you're experiencing with trusted family, with trusted friends. Ask for support rather than trying to manage everything alone. Connect with others who understand. And there are online communities out there. So just seeking those things out. Particularly important in the age of social media is just limiting comparison. Notice when you're comparing yourself unfavorably to others. And remember that you're comparing your internal experience to others' external presentation. So just consider social media breaks sometimes if comparison is particularly triggering for you. And just focusing on your own progress rather than relative achievements.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you very much for that. And they are very practical suggestions. And I imagine for some, trying these things on their own can feel rather overwhelming, or maybe they don't know where to start.
Really important point again, Wendy. So thank you for that. So if trying to implement those strategies just become another source of pressure or another list of things you should be doing, that completely defeats what we're trying to achieve. This is actually one of those really valuable aspects of therapy, having someone to help you prioritize, support you as you experiment with change, and to help you process what comes up when you start shifting these long held patterns. And change doesn't have to happen all at once. And I think that's really important to remember. Even small shifts like noticing your thoughts more often or setting one single boundary can begin to create movement for you. And you absolutely don't have to do this alone. And I think that's a really important thing just to hang on to. You're not alone in all of this.
Okay. So, Ian, for someone who's never been to therapy before, or maybe they might be hesitant about reaching out, can you walk us through what they might expect if they decided to seek support for their high functioning anxiety? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. If we think about organizations like Hope Therapy and Counselling, the first step is always the offer of a complimentary 15-minute consultation completely free of charge. It's a very relaxed, it's a very unpressurized conversation. We just talk a little bit about what the concerns are, how things are affecting the individual, and then just thinking about what might be the best way of working with that particular presentation, and then just selecting somebody that might be a really good fit for what you're working with. So we're thinking about both a therapeutic approach, but also the best person, the personality fit of the counsellor. And then we look at other flexible arrangements. Is it going to be done on a weekly basis? Is it going to be face to face? Is it going to be online? We think about scheduling. So all of these things become discussion points. And that's really about helping people just to decide whether therapy feels right, not about committing to anything. There's never any pressure. And if it doesn't, or maybe it's not quite the right time, knowing that's okay as well. If people decide to proceed, the first few sessions just focus on building rapport, building some trust. This is absolutely fundamental to effective therapy. And knowing that your therapist will work to gain a thorough understanding of your specific experience with high functioning anxiety. Explore what you'd like to be doing differently in your life. And collaborative goal setting is really important for therapeutic work. The emphasis there is on collaborative. A good therapist will never rush you. It's about just sharing at the pace that's right for you. Everything is about moving forward at your pace. And as therapy progresses, sessions typically involve exploring thoughts and beliefs and behaviors that are maintaining the anxiety, and learning and practicing new skills and new strategies, experimenting with small changes between sessions, processing what comes up as you start shifting long held patterns, addressing any deeper issues or past experiences that may be relevant as well. And just adjusting the approach based on what works best for the individual that we're working with. And as we progress, you might just start to notice a greater ability to recognize and interrupt anxious patterns. You might start to feel more comfortable with boundary settings, saying no. We might start to notice sleep improving. Maybe some of the physical symptoms start to reduce as well. Maybe people work on relationships and notice that the quality of relationship is starting to improve as well as there is an increased sense of presence. Maybe there's more self-compassion, less of a harsh self-criticism, and a sense that life just generally feels a little bit more manageable, a little bit more enjoyable. And eventually, as people develop their own tools and they feel more confident, sessions might become less frequent. And I think the thing to say is that ending therapy is always really collaborative, and many therapists offer follow-up sessions if needed as well. So that's just a little bit about what we might describe as the process of therapy, Wendy.
Hmm. Okay, if someone tries therapy but doesn't feel like it's working or doesn't connect with their therapist, what happens there?
The therapeutic relationship, absolutely crucial to effective therapy. If you don't feel a connection with your therapist, if you don't feel the approach is helping you after a few sessions, it's absolutely okay to say, this isn't working for me. And a good therapist will welcome that conversation, and they'll work with you to either adjust the approach or help you find someone else that's going to be a better fit with you. Like any relationship, you have to match with the person, not just the work that's being done. It's a collaboration. And sometimes we have to say, this isn't quite the right thing for me, but maybe there's something that's better out there.
Okay, thank you very much. So, even when people recognize they need support, there's often barriers that stop them from reaching out. What are some of the common concerns that you hear, particularly from people with high functioning anxiety?
I think this is a really important thing for us to address, Wendy, because those concerns are firstly incredibly common, and they often prevent people from getting help that could genuinely be transformative in their lives. So perhaps the most frequent concern from people with high functioning anxiety is, I don't have time for therapy. And it makes complete sense. Their lives are already absolutely packed to the brim. Here's what I say: if you're constantly exhausted, if you're lying awake worrying, if you're spending hours over preparing, or you're ruminating, therapy isn't adding time, it's reclaiming time. The time you spend in therapy often gets returned many times over through increased efficiency, better sleep, less rumination, and more energy. Also, for people that opt for online therapy, there's no travel time. You can have a session during your lunch break, from home in the evening, or at whatever time suits your schedule. Therapy is designed to fit into your life, not to disrupt it. Another common concern is thinking other people have real problems, mine aren't bad enough. And this is an absolutely classic high functioning anxiety speak. you're minimizing your own suffering because you're still managing to function, but suffering is suffering regardless of how it looks from the outside. You don't need to wait until you're completely unable to cope before you deserve support. In fact, seeking help before you reach that crisis point is actually the most sensible approach. If you're in distress, if your quality of life is compromised, if you're not experiencing joy or peace, that's enough. You don't need to earn the right to feel better. Many people with high functioning anxiety also think I should be able to handle this on my own. And there's a sense of pride. They pride themselves on being self sufficient and capable. And asking for help can just feel like they're admitting defeat somehow. But again, I always say, think about it this way. If you wanted to learn a new skill, or to improve at a sport, or to develop professionally, you'd seek expertise and you'd seek guidance. And why should managing your mental health be any different? Therapy isn't about being weak, it isn't about being incapable. It's about being wise enough to access expertise and support when you need it. The strongest people are often those who recognize when they need help and have the courage to ask for it. Some people may worry, what if therapy changes who I am as a person? And they're concerned somehow that addressing that anxiety means losing their drive or becoming complacent or lowering their standards. The reality is, therapy isn't about making you a different person, it's about helping you be yourself without that constant exhaustion and that constant overlay of anxiety being present. You'll still be motivated, you'll still be capable, you'll still be driven by values, you'll still be driven by genuine desire, but you won't be driven by firing and compulsions in the same way as you were before. Many clients actually tell us that they become more effective and more successful after therapy because they have more energy, they make clearer decisions, and they can just focus better without all that mental clutter and that constant worry. Another thing might be around financial concerns, and these can be legitimate as well. So, therapy, the best way to think about it is that it is an investment, but it's an investment in your well being, it's an investment in your relationships, and it's an investment in your quality of life. Many people find that the cost is more than offset by the benefits that come from it. Fewer sick days, improved work performance, better decision making, reduced spending on other ways of managing their stress. And a good counsellor or good counselling organisation will be transparent about costs right from the beginning. These are things that can be discussed right at the initial consultation. And the other thing to remember is that some people's employers offer things like employee assistant programs or will fund some level of support if it's really needed as well. So it can be worth checking, especially if you work in what might be a more progressive type of organization.
Mm. Absolutely. I'm really aware that these concerns, they are so relatable. I really think the idea of addressing them head on is such a valuable strategy. And it helps to normalize the hesitation people feel about reaching out, which is very common in England, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Hesitation is absolutely normal, particularly for people with high functioning anxiety who are used to managing everything themselves. But on the other hand, on the other side of that hesitation is often profound relief and meaningful change as well.
Okay. Ian, we've covered a lot today. I'm wondering if you could speak to what life can look like on the other side if you do choose to address the high functioning anxiety. What does recovery or healing actually mean in this context, do you say?
What a beautiful question to explore, Wendy, because it really is about hope and it really is about possibility, isn't it? So I think first I want to be clear that recovery from high functioning anxiety doesn't mean never feeling anxious again. We're not saying that. Anxiety is a normal human emotion, and some degree of stress is part of life. The goal isn't to turn us into robots. It's not to eliminate all anxiety. It's to change your relationship with it. And one of the most significant shifts people experience is just moving from being driven by fear of failure, judgment, or not being good enough to being guided by what actually matters to them. You might still work hard on achieving goals, but you're doing it because you genuinely care about the work, not because you're terrified constantly of what's going to happen if you don't. And that's a really fundamental shift in our internal experience. So instead of constantly running on empty and pushing through exhaustion, you develop rhythms of work, rhythms of rest, things that are sustainable. You have energy, not just for obligations, but for relationships, hobbies, things and simply enjoying day to day life. Sleep can often improve. Physical symptoms can often reduce and in some cases even disappear. You you aren't constantly feeling like you're on edge or you're just on that edge of burnout. And as you become more comfortable with vulnerability and more comfortable with setting boundaries, our relationships with our partners, our friends, our work colleagues can often be reported as deepening as well. So instead of performing or keeping people at a distance, you can start to show up more authentically for those people. Partners often report feeling far closer to us. Friendships can often be more genuine or more satisfying. And you're actually present in conversations rather than mentally checking off your to-do list. Perhaps one of the most precious shifts is just developing the ability to actually be in the moment, to eat a meal without having to plan the next three tasks ahead as we do it, to have a conversation with somebody without mentally rehearsing what you'll say next, to enjoy an achievement before moving on to the next goal. And you just experience more joy, peace, more simple contentment. And life becomes something to be lived rather than to be managed. And that's perhaps the deepest shift, just developing a sense that you're inherently worthy, not because of what you do or what you achieve, but simply because you exist. Your worth is no longer conditional on productivity, perfectionism, or other approval. You can rest without guilt. You can say no without panic. You can be imperfect and just to know that's okay.
That does sound, I would say, transformative. Some really good examples of how a person's life can be different. But I don't expect, I'm sure you're going to say this, it's actually not a linear journey. I'm sure there's loads of challenges and ups and downs on the way. Would that be the case?
Absolutely. Healing from high functioning anxiety is a journey. It's not a destination and it's rarely linear. There will be times when old patterns resurface, particularly during really stressful periods. And you might find yourself over preparing for something or falling back into people pleasing. Completely normal. And it doesn't mean you failed or that therapy hasn't worked. It's just a normal part of the process. The difference is that now you have awareness and you have tools. And when you notice yourself slipping into old patterns, you can recognize it. You can understand what's triggering it. And that just makes a difference in terms of our ability to make choices. You have compassion for yourself rather than that really harsh self criticism. And some people find that after therapy, they want to check in periodically for maintenance with their therapist as well, especially during particularly challenging or intense periods. And that's absolutely fine as well. It can be incredibly helpful for some people. Thinking of it like going to the dentist for regular checkups rather than waiting until you have to have a tooth removed because it's so painful.
Yeah, that's a very helpful and very realistic picture. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to dentistry in that way. Most definitely. Is there anything else you'd like people to take away from today's conversation, Ian?
So, a couple of final thoughts. I would say that if you recognize yourself in the description of what we've talked about today, just know that you're not alone. There are many people that are experiencing exactly what you are, more people than you might realize, because by its very nature, high functioning anxiety is often invisible to others. Also, knowing that the way you're feeling isn't inevitable and it isn't permanent or doesn't have to be. It's not just who you are or something you have to accept and put up with and manage forever. With support, things can genuinely change, not necessarily overnight and not without some level of work or effort, but change is absolutely possible. And the thing that I would really stress is you deserve more than simply coping. You deserve to thrive, to experience joy, to experience peace, to have energy for the things and the people that matter to you. Productivity and achievement are wonderful, but they're not the same as well being. And reaching out for support isn't a sign of weakness, it isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of wisdom and self respect. It's recognizing that you deserve care and support just like anybody else. And finally, you don't have to wait until you reach that crisis point. You don't have to earn the right to feel better by suffering enough first. If life feels harder than it needs to be, then it is. That's the time to reach out for help.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ian. That was incredibly comprehensive and I think will resonate with so many people. Absolutely. So, for those listening who recognize themselves in this description of high functioning anxiety and feel they might benefit from professional support, what should they do next?
There are organisations like Hope Therapy and Counselling Services who work with high functioning anxiety on a very regular basis. We have a whole team of very experienced counsellors and therapists who are experienced at working with this exact condition. We have people who work with a whole variety of different therapeutic approaches, whether that's CBT, whether that's EMDR, which are very evidence based approaches, but are also other approaches as well. And if people do want to know more, they can go to our website, which is www.hopefulminds.co.uk. That's www.hopefulminds.co.uk. We have a whole raft of free resources on the website, but people are very welcome just to book in for a complimentary 15-minute consultation just to talk in a little bit more detail about their unique situation and how we might work with them. And what about you, Wendy? As a very experienced CBT psychotherapist, I know that this is an area you work with on a very regular basis. So maybe just tell people a little bit about yourself and what you're able to offer to people.
Yeah, so if people want to know more about working for me, my website is called wendycastellino.com. It's got lots of free resources on there. There's a couple of ebooks there, one for stress for men and one for stress about women, because I think sometimes there is some differences regarding their roles and everything like that. So I have actually developed one for men and one for women. But if anybody wants to know more about working with me, you just need to contact me via my website, and then you can actually email me there and ask for a free consultation. That's absolutely fine. So, anything more you want to say, Ian?
Just to say thank you to you, Wendy, and thank everybody for listening today. And if today's episode has resonated with people, please do not suffer in silence, whether you reach out to somebody like Hope Therapy and Counselling, or to Wendy, or to somebody else. Just taking that first step towards support can be a genuinely life changing step to make.
Absolutely. And it's really important to emphasize that remembering seeking support, it is not a sign of weakness. I see it very much, I know Ian does, as an act of courage and self care. You deserve so much to feel better, and help is available therefore out there for you. So please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share this episode with anyone who you feel might benefit from hearing it. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in your experience can make such a difference. So thank you so much for joining us in the talk room. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.